Probably going to move around a little if that's okay. Brad, I want you to put up all the gods I don't believe in. You'll notice if you look carefully, I snuck in Dick Guernsey's name because and also the name of my car, Hyundai. So, but there have been over time, and again, these numbers are not so much made up as they depends on what website you look at, but there have been about 1,200 to 1,500 different religions and several thousand different gods. So obviously this is just a list. Now, one of the gods on the list, now is that up now, Brett? I'm not sure how that, oh, no, that's, yeah, okay. One of the gods on there is Yahweh, and of course that's the Jewish God, the Christian God, that's the Hebrew name for it. So we're going to talk about that. But the question is, obviously lots of questions, but why did people start believing in gods? Well, that answer was actually relatively easy. Why they started a religion is a little bit more complicated. But obviously ancient people had no explanation for things. They didn't know where thunder came from, so it must be a thunder god. They didn't know where an earthquake came from, so there was an earthquake god, okay? And that was developed over time. And that what ultimately happened was that religions were formed. And I'll get into that a little bit more later, but that's where all the gods come from. So today we're talking about things, theists and atheists. And I want to show you what a theist position is, okay? That God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all good, and can answer prayers. And I want to distinguish this from some people who might be familiar with the term deism, which would be a God who sort of started everything. And a lot of the people who are atheists, militant atheists, thinks that's baloney. They're just trying to, you know, find some place in the middle. But that's what a God is to a theist. Now, I could spend for a long time talking about what it is to an atheist, but let me tell you one of the best responses I've seen in terms of God and goodness and evil, and that would be the next slide. Okay, here's a point of view by the atheist Richard Dawkins, who's my favorite author. He's written several books about atheism. Something to think about. You may not all agree with this, but it's something to think about. If God is willing to prevent evil but can't, he's not omnipotent. If he is able to, but not willing, then he's malevolent. He's a little bit evil. If he is both able and willing to prevent evil, then why do we have evil? And finally, if he is neither willing or able, then why call him God? That is the basic atheist position. But there are other positions along the way that you might be thinking about. And so we're doing a little survey. It is totally anonymous. It really is. And it is, I take these things very seriously. So to count up the answers, John Murphy, please have a stand up, please. John Murphy is a PhD in statistics from, he doesn't like to admit that. And his church is over at, All Souls. And what we're going to do is now I'm going to put up something for you to look at. All right. Now,
Dick bought my services at a church auction a few years ago, and now he thinks he owns me.
Okay, this is a rating from Richard Dawkins, and I think you'll be fascinated by some of the things I tell you about this rating. So I'm going to ask you to put a number on the card and hand it down to John, but I want to go through these very quickly. Rating your belief if there's a God. Number one, 100% probability. I know there's a God. Nothing will change my mind. Number two, very high probability. I live my life with the assumption that there is one. That's a very important part. Number three, higher than 50%, but not very high. I lean toward believing, but I am uncertain. Number four, I have a problem with, but I'll read it to you. 50% of God or no God. I'm an impartial agnostic. Number five, lower than 50. I am agnostic, but I lean toward atheism. I don't know if there is a God, but I am inclined to be skeptical. God is improbable. I live my life with the assumption he is not there watching over me. And number seven, the spin of number one, there is no God, period, end of conversation, next question. Please put your number down It is totally anonymous, and pass them up toward John. Okay? I'll just give you 30 seconds to do that. Oh, can you put it back up, Brett, please? Thank you. And I'm going to give John several minutes to figure this out, but I want to explain something about this diagram. Totally anonymous, very important. Everybody comfortable that I did that? Everybody okay with that? Okay. Okay. Now, what I'm going to ask Dr. Murphy to do, you like when I, Dr. Murphy, is really just give me one number, and that's the spectrum, the range. We could do other numbers as well, but I don't want people to feel out of place here. But I am curious what the range is. Let me tell you something about this. Brett, I'm sorry. I'm going to keep asking you to put that back up. I'm sorry. Richard Dawkins, who is a militant atheist, and I might mention that again later, even he does not put himself as number 7. And I will tell you why. Because he is a scientist. And what is a scientist always open to? Proof. He's always, see, faith is belief without evidence. That's the definition for atheists anyway, for what faith is, belief without evidence. Dawkins, who is a militant atheist, actually puts himself at about 6.5. Because he reached the point, I was reading one of his recent commentaries, and he said, I'm at the point now where if somebody tried to prove it to me, I'd think they were lying. In other words, they would be giving them the wrong kind of proof. The other thing that's interesting is number 4, 50% chance of God or no God. I'm an impartial agnostic. Dawkins got in trouble with his faithful, oh, that's the wrong word, got in trouble with his fans because it made him seem like he was agnostic, because he was saying it's improbable, it's very improbable, but I'm open to proof. And that made him seem a little agnostic. I'm not sure how many number 5s there really are. My guess is going to be, well, I'm not even going to guess. We'll go through whatever and see what people have put down. But that's basically the list that Dawkins did. It was very controversial at the time, and I thought it would be fun to do it with the group. Okay, so where'd religion come from? Well, it's kind of interesting, because Darwin thought that religion actually was something that we passed along. Look at it this way. As Unitarians, we don't think of ourselves as, well, and again, I have to be careful. There might be some people here that do that. That's fine, but I'm talking as an atheist now. We feel we are the children of God, okay? He is our father. That's the metaphor, right? Isn't that the metaphor that we all use? Okay. How is that passed on? Well, as parents, we are the father and mother of the children. And Dawkins and also Darwin thought that the idea of obeying somebody was possibly something that was in our genes. Okay, we had a tendency to look up or to look to our parents or to look to God, and that, of course, is passed along. So that's one of the possible explanations for why we have religion. Also, people like to have patterns. Okay, when you know, going back to ancient times when there were hunter-gatherers, people gathered in groups and they needed something cohesive to keep them together. So religion seemed to form that basic idea. Now, what's happened to atheism over the centuries? There probably was very little atheism in ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. But when time moved on and we got into the Age of Enlightenment or the Renaissance, all of a sudden, some of the things we could not explain, we could explain. And that increased the number of people who are atheists. Not a lot. Right now, 84% of the world is not atheist. Okay? That's a lot of people, several billion, obviously. Okay? But it increased over time as our scientific knowledge increased. Okay, there were a couple of things that made it bump up a little bit. Charles Darwin made it bump up a little bit. Here was somebody who could explain the diversity of life, because that's something that fundamentalist Christians thought it just all happened that way, okay? They didn't believe the concept of, I'm talking about the far right now. They didn't believe the concept of evolution, but why not? You know, some people say, you know, I'll hear some people say, oh, evolution was perfect. Evolution was not so perfect. About 95% of all species that ever existed are gone now. This was not a perfect thing that God did if God did it. But the idea that things became more understandable changed things. I'll tell you what else changed things, a couple of things. The Holocaust changed things for many people. I'm sorry he's not here, but my very good friend Frank Gunwald was a survivor of the Holocaust. And I didn't know this for sure, but I suspected it. And I called him the other day and invited him here, and he couldn't make it. But Frank is a survivor of the Holocaust, and he is an atheist. And I said, were you always an atheist? He said, well, it's hard for me to determine that because I was 8 years old and I have no memory of what I felt at that time. He said, but now, and it's interesting, when you have something like the Holocaust, it can go both directions, can't it? Some people will become more believers and some people will become less believers. And that's a very important concept. I'll tell you what else changed things. It was 9/11, because it allowed people who recognize extremism does not represent what most religions represent. Because so obviously there are Muslims who are very fine people, Arabs, Jews, Christians. But what it did show us, and it shows some people, was that there was a part of religion that was potentially dangerous. And people started to do that. But here's the great irony of all of this. And when I started thinking about this, when I told you about how people form groups, and groups are very important, there were patterns people understood, that made them more religious, but it also made them more frightened of others, okay? They banded together, okay? You know, I always tell people when we talk about like, thou shalt not kill in the 10 Commandments, that was really meant for people in your own little group. Obviously, Moses killed a lot of people, and there's a lot of death and destruction in the Bible, but death generally meant that's your group, and to be afraid of other groups. And for atheists, that's a little bit of a frightening aspect of what belief is. What's the next slide, Brett? I just lost my place, like one off the topic here. Oh, what is it? Help me out here. Oh. So this is really the basis of my presentation. I looked up religion in several different dictionaries, encyclopedia, Wikipedia, and this is basically, obviously everyone's a little bit different, but this is basically what it said: the belief in and worship of a supernatural power or powers, especially a god or God, okay? So, the question that I want to ask before we get to our, have we got good results? Okay. Oh, thank you. Interesting. That's kind of what I predicted, isn't it? Okay. The idea of question is, if someone asks you, well, someone asks an atheist, what's your religion? They'll say, well, I'm a non-believer. I don't have a religion. Atheism is not a religion. I know some critics of atheism say that, no, it's not a religion at all. It's a non-belief. But if you said, I'm a Unitarian, okay, and you were comfortable saying Unitarianism was a religion, that's fine. You may say that's perfectly okay. But if it's a religion, then the question is, can you be a religious atheist? And can you be a religious Unitarian? I don't know the answer to that. I know religious atheist doesn't make sense, and I'm not going to answer the second one. But can you be a religious atheist? You can be a religious Catholic, you can be a religious Christian, you can be a religious Jew, but can you be a religious Unitarian? I don't know the answer to that. You have to answer that for yourself. Now, we talked about this at home only for about 3 months, right? And what we decided was there's a difference, because we don't have a creed. We have principles, but we don't live by a creed, okay? So religious generally means that you accept the creed, You accept the dogma, and that probably makes you religious. If somebody tried to get into a church in town and said to the person, you know, who was admitting them, I don't know if they do it like that way, but said, you know, I want to attend this church, but I don't believe in Christ. Well, that's a little bit of a problem, isn't it? That's a little bit of a problem. Not a problem here. Not a problem here at all, because that's why we are here. We are here because we respect everybody's journey. We like the fact that we could sitting people. And let me take a look at what John's done here. Okay, I will give you the, what's the word again, range. The range went from 1, we're glad you're here, thank you, all the way up to 7, okay? And I'm just going to say what I predicted, that the most were 5 and 6. Okay, that's what I would have predicted. So whoever you are is number 1. We're glad you're here. We respect that. That's what this is all about, okay? All right, let's go on, Brett. Oh, this is a great Einstein quote. I am a deeply is this the last thing I want to do, Brett? Or is this right? Well, it doesn't matter. I am a deeply religious non-believer, a somewhat new kind of religion. I have never imputed to nature a purpose or goal. When I see nature, what I see in nature is a magnificent structure that can be comprehended only and imperfectly and fills a thinking person with a feeling of humility. This is generally religious feeling that has nothing to do with the supernatural. The idea of a personal God is quite alien to me. The reason he made that quote is that they cherry-picked some of his quotes to make it look like he was a theist and that he believed in God. And he wanted to know that his God is the magnificence of the universe, and he didn't want people to misunderstand that. So that was the quote. What's the next one, Brett? Oh, okay. Let's keep that up for a second. Here's another big question I wanted to answer. If you talk, by the way, I should tell you that we have several best friends. I don't want to keep you out of this. We have several best friends, and one of a couple that we know are very, very religious, okay? We don't talk a lot about this, but the important thing is that we love each other. They're the most wonderful people. And I asked him one day, they pray every day, blah, blah, blah. And their contention is that the only reason that we know how to do good is because of God. And I said to them the other day, I said, if you could, this is a big hypothetical, if you could be convinced that there was no God, would you go out and rape and steal and murder people? And they said, well, of course not. Well, why not? You just told me that you think that morality is based on a belief in God. Well, that's crazy. There isn't a person in this room, and that would include some of the people who were higher up on the list in believing in God. I don't think if you could be proven otherwise that you would do any of those things. And you know why that is? Because societies evolved with basic morality. Because you can't have a society that embraces rape, stealing, killing. That society would not last. It would die out. So part of the evolutionary process is that morality is sort of built in to what happens to us as our society progresses. If there were societies based where people could steal and lie and cheat, it's not here anymore. I mean, I'm not an anthropologist, but I'm pretty much certain that there couldn't be a church like that. So, and to prove my point, how am I doing on time here? Oh, good. Got 5 more minutes. To prove my point, I have put up for you the 3 countries that have the most per capita, the most atheists, okay? That's the 3 countries in the world with the most atheists. And now, Brett, I want you to put up the 3 countries that give the most to charity. Now, change the slide, Brett.
I did change the slide.
Oh, well, isn't that interesting? The same 3 countries that have the most per capita atheists are the 3 countries that give the most individually to charity. The basic premise that atheists are not good people is just bizarre. It's just bizarre because you know as well as I do, there are a lot of people who are God-fearing people who are terrible people. And you know what? There are atheists. There are atheists who are terrible people too. So I'm not here to tell you that atheism makes you moral, not at all. But I'll tell you one thing, there's never been an atheist war. Isn't that right? There's never been an atheist war where one band of atheists went against another band. That's never going to happen. I can tell you that right now. That's never going to happen. Right now, to show you one more thing, here are three famous atheists. On the left, who is it? George Soros. In the middle, everybody awake? Stephen Gates. And on the right?
Bill Gates. You're confusing him with Steve Gates.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bill Gates. And on the right, Warren Buffett. Okay, those are three well-known atheists. Brett, put up the three biggest philanthropists in the country. Go ahead, Brett, change the slide.
I did.
Nuts. Okay, so those are not only are they three famous atheists, they are the three biggest philanthropists in the country. The idea that you have to believe in God in order to be a good person, I will tell you, quite frankly, that's bizarre to me. Now, and if you believe in God, that's great, but you don't have to believe in God to be a good person. There are lots of good people, all right? In fact, I just put up a couple of names there. You might recognize some of them. I put in some current ones and some past ones. Okay. Oh, and you're probably saying, wait a second, where are the women? Okay, put up some women too. And some of those names you may recognize, okay? What's that? Did I put one wrong up? Oh, yeah, Mother Teresa, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry. I could have done a whole lecture on her. She lost her faith at the end. In fact, Dawkins makes a big deal about that. I think it's a way you interpret what she said, because I read some of her things. She just lost faith. She felt that things were not going the way that they should, and she was a little bit skeptical about it. Okay, I'm going to end with this, and then I have two quick comments. We can learn a lot from religion. We really can. Religion has been very successful in a lot of ways. The Catholic Church last year raised $90 billion. They're very good at that. I wish we could be that good at it. We could probably get out of here if we had to, with 90 billion. No, that is a good question. I don't know. Yeah. That's a scientist talking. Thank you, Amy. That's great. The holidays. What I'm going to say now, I think, is very important, but the idea of enjoying the holidays is something that perpetuates religion. Going down to number 3 real quickly, or not, it's not numbered, but calendars, songs. I once asked my rabbi, I went to Hebrew school for 4 years, and I said, what's the most important publication or book in Judaism? And you know what he said? The calendar. Because the calendar keeps reminding you that you are Jewish. That's why we have 15 holidays. I'm not being sarcastic about that. Part of it is because some of the holidays are really, quite frankly, I say this as a Jew, stupid holidays. But it reminds us every month, sometimes for 2 days, that we are Jews. That's a very important part of what religion is. It's a question of repetition. Amy plays the same song sometimes. That's good. That reminds us who we are, okay? Now, when we were Mary Ellen and I were at the museum the other day, the art museum, we went into that European art thing and had all the magnificent paintings that reflected their religion, the Christianity. And I thought to myself, we don't have that, do we? We do not have, there's not a lot of Unitarian art. There just isn't. I mean, not that I know of anyway. When we give up, and I'm probably the victim of this too, when somebody comes up here to this podium, most of the time, this is not a criticism, obviously, if I was unhappy with it, I wouldn't be here. But most of the time, it's more of a lecture. It's more of a sermon than a lecture. That's not what Christians do. They come out, this is my favorite Garrison Keillor line. He was talking about being the New York subway, where there was a black minister who was screaming about going to hell and going to heaven and you know, save the earth and blah blah blah. And Garrison Keillor said there are no Unitarian ministers screaming in the subway. Isn't that probably true? That's just not how it works. So, okay. I hope that you've gotten something out of it. Let me just look real quick at my notes and see if I did forget anything. Oh, okay. I wanted to tell you one thing, which is kind of fun. If I can find it now, and I've lost it. Marianne was on a, oh, shoot. How can I lose that? Is it down here? Anyway, Mary Ellen was on a road trip with my sister. You may have read about it. And she passed by the Creationism Museum in Kentucky. And she got a brochure. And I'm going to take that brochure and I'm going to go to the Creationism Museum because I want to tell them something that they don't know. And what I'm going to tell them is that the Flintstones is a cartoon, not a documentary. And I want them to understand that. That's very important, okay? I hope I've given you something to think about. It's not something we talk about very often. The range that John gave me is kind of what I was thinking, that they would be mostly in one particular area. But there is a range from 1 to 7. You are all welcome. That's what we're about. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. Thanks, folks, very much.